in the venture philanthropy model. I think today we are very glad that we have a very great panel sitting here. I'll quickly introduce them. From the far end is Dana Duane, who is the consultant and advisory board member in Center for Community Development. And we got Nancy Yang from Hong Kong, who is the executive director of Asian Charity Services Limited. We got Passion Low, who is the director of philanthropy, National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center. And you're going to introduce your volunteer work on the side later on. Hans Bendorf, who is the head global business development of Axion. So let's welcome them with a big round of applause. Thank you. So today is very straightforward, and we want to keep a more casual pace. So we do not have a lot of people, so I think that is going to be very interactive. And then we talked about why sports is important. Through their experiences, you will get to know more about how people play a big value in venture philanthropy. Secondly, we talk about what. There exists all different kinds of models. So here, they will talk a lot about that, especially Hans is going to introduce some new model, new trend in the venture philanthropy world that's going on now. And also, last but not least, is how. I keep on emphasizing that we want to provide more small tips, so that you can get to know what is going on in different countries. I don't believe that we could fit into every different country, every different cities with one box. So I think try to capture all different things. The small tips might be more important than one big box sometimes. So can I have a quick check on all of you guys? I myself is Francis from Social Ventures Hong Kong. We are venture philanthropy practitioners. So we incubate and we have a small fund of VP fund to invest into social innovation in Hong Kong. So who are you from venture philanthropy practitioners? You're VP? You three of them. From the funding side, or family, or foundations, or corporate, or capital provider? 1, 2, 3 of you. So people don't know. I raised a couple of times, maybe. Government. Oh, right. There's a few of you. Social entrepreneur. Maybe some different roles for you. Okay, all right, so there's a quick chat so that we can get to know more about all these things. So let's not wait for too long. So first of all, I would like to get Dana to have an opening, around 5 minutes for each of them. And then after that, we'll have a round of questions from the floor, also from myself. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can you hear me? It's working? Okay. Hi, everyone. I work with, as Francis mentioned, I work with the Lynn Center for Community Development. Our logo kind of explains who we are. We are trying to create a community in Ho Chi Minh City, a community of people that care about development and want to tackle the issues that we're facing, such as rising inequality, high rural to urban migration, and a lot of other problems that come along with those issues. As we work with not-for-profit organizations and not-for-profit organizations, donors that are working with not-for-profit organizations, it is critical that the people are involved. We are accountable to the community, we get money from the community, so we need to involve the community somehow. And volunteerism plays a very important role, not just in terms of serving the direct beneficiaries, but also in terms of building the capacity of the organizations. Because the donors that give to nonprofits typically want overheads low, so the staff of nonprofits often and usually say that they are overworked and underfunded. So what I'm trying to present here is kind of a new model of volunteerism that helps address that capacity of the staff of nonprofits while still keeping the donors happy. And then to provide you with an example of what we've done to match a skilled volunteer with a local nonprofit, and then share with you personally from the Lynn Center how we use volunteers to become a more effective organization. So firstly, we're familiar with traditional volunteers, most people are, and I'm sure some people in this room, because of the topic, are familiar with skilled volunteer models. And what Lynn is trying to do is, we believe that there's a need for traditional volunteers, but we are focused on the skilled volunteers because we believe that they can impact long-term improvement in the community, whereas the skilled volunteers are typically more useful for short-term needs. And so we want to get people to this kind of long-term support where they're investing in the people, investing in the ideas, and adding values that usually can only be found, or assets that can only be found in the private sector. So some of the examples of the areas where we've had a lot of success is in kind of PR, marketing, communication skill sets. working with companies and individuals from those companies that can add value to the nonprofits to help them realize and communicate their missions and their activities, both through the supporters as well as to the beneficiaries and clients. Also in human resource management and motivation, they've been very useful in terms of as being consultants and providing added support. And the impact in that respect on the organizations, it's on the organizations, but also on the volunteers themselves. They typically have a much better experience, and they feel that they've had a bigger impact when they work in this way. So one example that I'd like to share with you is a volunteer. Her name is Tui V. She's a lecturer at the university, she's a lecturer of communications, and she, has felt she feels she needs to have some practical experience and not just be a lecturer. But she never got much out of doing that for the private sector. She felt very dissatisfied, so she came to Lynn and asked for an opportunity to work with a nonprofit. We matched her with a very impressive organization that's a network of disabled people's organizations. They're called DRD for short, and they do direct service as well as kind of advocacy work for the disability community in Vietnam. And her role was to help them with social media because they needed to share their message with the broader audience, with the public of Vietnam, not just with the policymakers and not just with the disabled people, but the communities and the people that hire people with disabilities. So her tasks were, essentially these two main tasks was to guide the staff who were assigned to be social media people for the organization, and also to help them create a strategic communication plan. And immediately, within 6 months, she created amazing impacts. They were thrilled that, their first event, they had 200 people show up versus, previous events, 30 to 40. They had a media campaign on Facebook. They got so many engaged users right away in the first 6 months, and the number of hits they got on their page definitely exceeded their expectations. So essentially what she did was she raised the bar for the organization. Before they had low targets, now they have much higher targets. So for them, they're thrilled, and they also start to see what they can do, what their abilities are on their own, as well as how they need to reach out to the private sector to ask for their help and how they can. But for the volunteer, she's continuing to work with DRD, but she's also started working with other nonprofits in the community because she said, here's a quote from her, but she said that it's really helped her to provide practical examples for her students in school, and it also gives her more meaning in her life, and she's since started dating a gentleman from the DRD, so I think that's an added value. So many benefits. And then just in terms of the importance to the Lynn Center, we only had, in our first year, 2009, we started with $44,000 US. That's not much, and we are entirely a service organization. We provide services to the donors, the nonprofits, and the volunteers. So we need to have people, but we couldn't afford it. So we had to engage a lot of people pro bono. Our chief executive director, our chief accountant, our HR manager, myself as strategic advisor, we are all unpaid staff. We either left our jobs or we work in our free time to support the center. In the beginning, a lot of us would do that in our free time, and then more of us have jumped into a more full-time position. But we also use so many other kinds of volunteers. I list, like here, just some of the many examples. We use web designers, we use graphic designers, photographers, videographers. They do what the impossible for our organization. We're a 4-person paid staff, but it feels like we have 20 staff because these people we see regularly at our events and our activities and on email, and they're supporting us. So my challenge to all of you and the people that you work with is to, this is a great opportunity for you as a volunteer, but also for the organizations to receive sophisticated, smart people with great skill sets.
So I think it's a big group. So I think I'll leave it to Nancy to introduce us.
So I'm Nancy Young. I'm the Executive Director of Asian Charity Services. We're a Hong Kong-based nonprofit, and our mission and really our passion is to serve small to medium-sized nonprofits by providing pro bono business consulting and training. Over the last 6 years, we've completed about 120 consulting projects, and we focus in 3 major areas: strategic planning, board governance, and fundraising strategies. And we've identified those areas as really your core needs of the organization. And I can unpack that later. I have a lot of pressure to fit this into 5 minutes. But our model, as Francis was alluding to, is we leverage local business professionals as volunteer consultants. So right now we have a pool of about 900 some odd business professionals from the Hong Kong community who are registered with us as volunteer consultants. We also have about 10 corporate accounts, including Goldman Sachs, Macquarie Group, Bain & Company, who regularly send us business professionals as well. So our program model is that middle graphic there, that ACS, by providing training and support to our volunteers together, we're able to scale up and provide time, knowledge, and skills to our charity clients. While our first love or our passion is really the small to medium-sized NGOs who are receiving the training and the consulting, as Dana alluded to, what we found is that a secondary beneficiary, if you will, is the actual volunteer professional. So we get constantly feedback back to say, I had no idea that my marketing skills, my finance skills, my accounting skills, or my general business skills could be so applicable. So A, they're able to identify opportunities to use their skills in an impactful, meaningful way in a very tightly structured project, and I'll speak to that as well. And B, another major area of feedback from this bottom green circle is that the volunteer consultants are actually receiving exposure to issues within the community that they normally wouldn't in their ivory tower. Because let's face it, each of us in some way live in some type of ivory tower. And so that in itself is strengthening, we believe, civil society and the general community of Hong Kong and the Greater China. We have a few stats down here. I'm going to start speaking even more quickly than I normally do, which is that in 2012, we completed 31 consulting projects, which is about almost 4,000 volunteer hours. So with regards to market value of some kind of equivalent, it's almost $1 million US in consultancy services provided pro bono to the local community. All right, ACS. So not only do we, and what we say is we serve those who serve. That's what we get excited and passionate about. In order to do so, you've got to bridge a lot of cultural gaps. What are these cultural gaps? Well, actually, if you don't mind, I'll start from the left-hand side of this slide. One is, what are the underlying organizational needs for any NGO? One is to overcome strategic challenges at some type of inflection point or pivotal point of development. We find that this is driven either by people or money. You get a new executive director. You have a grant, we've served organizations who said, we have a big grant, we're not exactly sure what to do with it. That happens. We also have we serve organizations who say we're losing. We're on the tail end of our 3-year grant. We need to figure out what to do. Or they get a new board member. So again, what are the triggers in an organization's life cycle that will really make it slightly more open to receiving outside consulting support? And that's where we step in. There's also an ongoing need for functional support due to what we call lack of infrastructure and organizational support, which Dana and other people have said is not enough time, not enough resources, not enough money. And that's just the ongoing environment that NGOs or NPOs work in. Actually, these types of issues, organizational capacity building issues, all entities face. It just so happens in the social sector, we have not enough time, not enough money, not enough resources. Leadership development and succession planning is another common organizational need that we'll see. Now, this is not just at the staff level, at the CEO level, at the board level. I often speak on this, that boards across, nonprofit boards in Asia are one of the most under-leveraged assets in the social sector. They look great, a lot of branding, they look really nice, they're not fully utilized to really drive the organization and push it forward. And finally, attaining long-term sustainability. And this issue came up quite a few times in the keynote speakers, where they were talking about the trade-off between, that right now scalability is very sexy and very exciting, and people are looking at what can scale up. We've got to look for that. In fact, sustainability is really what a lot of the small grassroots organizations are doing. All right, so if you have these types of organizational needs, what are the challenges to meet them? In Hong Kong, as well as most other urban areas, we have a huge, wide range and a very deep range of professional service space to draw from. So why isn't it just an easy matching of demand and supply? If you have hundreds of thousands of HBS, Harvard Business School graduates, and Wharton graduates, and MDs at Morgan Stanley, and thousands of nonprofits in Hong Kong alone, why can't we just match them up? Well, that's the middle part. What are the challenges? There's basic cultural gaps. There's cultural gaps, we were actually talking about it much across the whole social sector, between NGOs and government, between NGOs and funders, but specifically between the business sector or your typical volunteer consultants that we would reach out to, as well as the nonprofits. What does it mean to be efficient? What does it mean? How long does it take for you to respond to emails? That's a cultural gap. What is your, in fact, in the healthcare panel, they said that philanthropy, and I would say from the nonprofit perspective, is actually an expression of values, right? It's not a wrong or a right, but they have different values. And so it's really meeting those values and thinking through how the business sector intersects with the social sector, or where those gaps are. There's language issues. Now, these language issues are not specific to speak Cantonese or Mandarin or English or German or a different dialect. But also, we do something called customer analysis, which is very straightforward in an ACS strategic planning project. Even the word customer can be off-putting to some NGO leaders. We are an organization of the city. We're looking at our brothers and sisters. Our customers, anyone who walks in the door, that's our customer. So it's really, how do you bridge these gaps in an efficient way? And that, therefore, I said, on the bottom, there's a real need for intermediaries. In order to effectively leverage this incredible wealth of professional services and apply it into the nonprofit sector, there is a real need for intermediaries to make it happen. And that's where organizations, I think, like ourselves, step in. And then on the right-hand side, this is what we've learned over the last 6 years in terms of what are the volunteer core competencies that really make it work. It's not only a list of hard skills, management, marketing, communication, legal, accounting, et cetera, which is very similar to, I think, some of the skills that you put up on your slide. But what we found is the soft skills that make it work, such as listening, interpersonal, team building, facilitation, empowering, and inspiring. And that, again, may, in fact, go back to the ACS values, is that our approach and our vision is to empower and to equip NGO leaders who are already doing incredible work in the local community. So we don't need a McKinsey VP, though we've taken them in, to just come in and say, I looked at your website, I have the answer. Here it is. Our approach is much more collaborative, much more discussion-based, much more engaging, much more open-ended, such that the nonprofit who is our beneficiary, our client, will own the answer, and they'll actually implement. And so therefore, I really emphasize kind of the soft skills. That's been really our learning, that's one of our critical success factors, is identify volunteer consultants who are strong in the far right corner. All right, I gotta move forward. All right, finally, so we've talked about ACS, serving those who serve, ACS, bridging cultural gaps, and finalizing, maximizing philanthropic capital. So what are lessons that we've learned at ACS with regards to mobilizing human capital? One is start at the top. ACS, we provide all of our consulting and training pro bono. But how we go about that is we go through quite a lengthy evaluation stage, and as well as we require leadership to be there. So we don't take on a client unless their executive director and a minimum of one board member attends all trainings. So we've had numerous introductions to organizations. We had one investment bank ask us to look at their portfolio of charities because they felt that some charities that they had been funding very significant dollars to kind of lost their way. One was a very brand name organization in Hong Kong. And the CEO said, this is fantastic. I love what you're doing at ACS. We definitely want to do strategic planning with you. Here are the 3 members of my team who will attend. And we said, if you don't go and we don't get a board member to come, then I'm really sorry you're not eligible. Because in order for the organization to move forward with what's been developed, we need leadership. So that started at the top. Okay, now I'm going to go quicker. So invest in a cause and the people who will make it happen. This theme has come up again and again and again, and it's very much in line with the whole venture philanthropy theme. Even in venture capital, there's not a single venture capitalist who will say, oh, I'm going to invest in the product and I don't care about the management. From a venture philanthropy perspective, you're investing in the cause and the people who will make it happen. And so therefore, it really boggles my mind that active philanthropists will invest in a program, but not in marketing it, branding it, managing the people who run it. Just that those two principles are kind of contradictory, if you will. Next is seeking higher ROI and upstream work, strategy versus operations. In skills-based volunteering, there's a range of projects that that, as well as general capacity building projects that NGOs need help on. But what we found is if you don't address what I call upstream work, the strategy, then you'll have lower return on the downstream work. So for example, if an NGO needs a donor database and they say, please just give me $50,000, I need a donor database, I need to better manage my donor information. What is their fundraising strategy for the next 3 years, for the next 2 years, for the next year? Who are they targeting? What type of information will they need? How much money are they going after? What segments are they going after? If they haven't answered basic strategic questions, then your $50,000 or even $5,000 for the donor database is not as well utilized. So always look more upstream and make sure that your organization has really addressed the strategic questions before you move downstream. And finally, I would say, identify your organization's role in societal transformation. If philanthropy is an expression of values, how do you want to change society? How will the local community that you're physically in look different because you've been there and moved from there? And I'll end with a quote from David Rockefeller. And he said that philanthropy is involved with basic innovations that transform society, not simply maintaining the status quo or filling basic social needs that were formerly the province of the public sector. So I'm so excited and thankful to have the opportunity to share with you. And I really am just encouraged, and I would encourage you to think about how will you transform society. Sorry to talk for so long.
Thank you, Nancy. So I'll just we'll let Hans go first. The rest of it. So Hans, Hans just moved to Singapore permanently just for a few days. So I think I'll leave it to Hans to talk about some of the new model that the organization is trying to use now. Hans, please.
All right. I'll actually be talking. I'll briefly introduce Action, our approach to human resource development, and then I'll also introduce the secondment model of Action. Action is a global non-profit microfinance organization. Our mission is to build a financially inclusive world, and we've been around for 50 years, doing microfinance for nearly 40 years. We provide management services, technical assistance, as well as investment services to our partner institutions. We currently operate in 21 countries, and through our partners, we service around 6 million clients around the world in the 4 continents we operate in. Apart from providing these services, we also confront industry-wide challenges such as client protection, as well as training and human resource development, which brings me to the next slide. Microfinance, in spite of the fact that it's been around for quite a while, as some of you may know, it's really boomed only about 10, 12 years ago, so it's still a fairly young industry, with limited training and capacity building facilities and opportunities. And we, for example, we operate in 4 countries, 4 continents, and our staff is spread around 15, sometimes even 20 countries. And we've addressed these challenges by building global training centers. Currently, we have training centers in India, in China, and in Accra, in Ghana, Africa. Through these training centers, we provide several training programs which cater not only to our partner institutions, but also to the overall industry. So we, for example, provide a training called Making Microfinance Work, which has been developed by the International Labour Organization, as well as our own signature training programs, which include topics such as risk management, financial management, marketing, product development, etc. And those training programs are mostly for the mid-management levels in microfinance organizations. In addition to that, we also provide capacity building facilities and opportunities for senior management, and those are primarily focused to our own partner institutions, but we also often invite senior managers from other institutions to join us. Those include exposure visits, which we found really is one of the most effective mechanisms to build the capacity and sort of open the eyes of senior managers. We send whole teams, for example, from our African partners, the senior management teams from African partners to Latin America, where the microfinance industry is a lot more developed, sophisticated, mature, and they get an opportunity to spend a couple of days with one or several institutions there and have discussions, workshops with the senior managers in these institutions in Latin America. Finally, we have developed the secondment model. I actually don't think that we developed it, and it's also not that new, but we found it very useful because we realized that just providing technical assistance, i.e. consulting services, to our partner institutions is not that effective, so we started providing management services, which means that we hire either locally or regionally or even globally senior managers and place them with our partner institutions. So they are part of the senior management team of our partner institutions. Very often we even second the CEO, mostly in C positions, i.e. the CFO or the head of IT, head of commercial, head of risk. Usually we second 2 to 3 of these senior managers per institution, depending on the needs and the maturity of each institution. And these people, they are Axion employees, but they effectively work with the institutions. They're in the line positions of our partner institutions. And usually they come from a financial sector background, banking, etc. Usually they're very, very seasoned, highly skilled people that we as Axion, as an international organization, can attract, also because of our double line objective. We then also provide a very comprehensive training, onboarding to these seconded managers and place them with the institution. The idea is really to rotate these institutions from one partner institution to the next, but they usually, we found that it's most effective if they stay for at least 2 to 3 years per partner institution. But some of the secondees find these positions so interesting that they are then interested to move on to other partners on the same continent, sometimes even across continents. The objective here is to build the capacity of our partner institutions and to ensure the effective transfer of international expertise and best practices. These seconded managers also build and groom their successors. So when they move out, there needs to be a replacement in place that can take over, so that there's not a gap that when we move, for example, one secondee from one institution to the next. We only do that if there is already a replacement in place. All right?
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we go back to Patson. Feeling better now?
Thank you very much. Sorry, I hope I cough and woke everybody up.
Yeah, it's quite cold.
Yes.
So Patson actually started her current career from being a volunteer with us. So actually, she will be going to talk about what her organization right now is mobilizing volunteer. At the same time, she is doing a lot of volunteer still in another organization. So I leave it to Patson.
Thank you, Francis, and everybody else. I'm from the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center, and in Singapore, our organization tries to promote more effective giving. In giving, by our definition, includes the giving of time, which is volunteerism, and giving of money, which is philanthropy. But what I'm sharing today actually has more to do with my own personal journey and how I ended up there, as well as some of the personal experiences I've had in terms of working with human capital, because after all, we're talking about mobilizing them, so I'll talk about how I was mobilized and how I try to mobilize others. So just a quick sequence of my personal story. I'm 39 this year, so I don't really have a very long story to tell, but I'll tell it as best as I can. I started out my career in Wall Street. I spent almost 13 years in the financial sector, well, in New York, in Hong Kong, and also a little bit in Singapore. Throughout my career, I volunteered, and that to me was my first exposure as a corporate professional to some of the social issues which are typically not visible if you're in the so-called corporate ivory tower. I think, as Nancy said, we're all in some kind of an ivory tower. And because I was inspired by my volunteering, I decided to leave the corporate sector, leave the financial sector, and very naively thought that I've got all these corporate skills behind me, I'm just going to go and do my own social thing. So I started a social enterprise which failed, but I say failed with a smiley face because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have learned what I learned to be able to continue in the social sector today. What I did after that failure was I joined the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center. So my boss was Lawrence Lien this morning, who very heartily endorsed embracing failure. So he hired me, so he must have embraced some kind of failure. In my spare time, I continue to volunteer in microfinance, which is something that I feel very strongly about, and I founded the Microfinance Society of Singapore. People that are interested in that, I'm happy to talk more about that. So that's my personal experience in terms of one of the pieces of human capital that have been mobilized. What does that translate to as far as now I am in the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center and I run the philanthropy division, which was only formalized about 2 years ago. So I had to build that team from nothing into something. And throughout that process, and I now run a team of 7, not a very big team, but I think reasonable size by nonprofit standards. The entire NVPC consists of about 40 plus staff. And what I learned about that journey of trying to form this team was that there were some really exciting things that we were going through in terms of trying to build up this team. The people that joined us joined because they do believe that they have a role to play in creating social change. And that kind of drive is very difficult to ignore because that would really motivate people to go through some of the darkest times when it comes to working in nonprofit. So we were very, very excited to find people that shared that kind of mindset. A lot of the people that joined us were attracted by what they would consider a nascent industry. We always say the social sector is growing, the civic sector is growing. Just like 20 years ago, you said the biotech sector was growing. So people are attracted by that. There's a chance to be a part of a growing sector. A lot of the people that we hired were similar to me, volunteers first, and then developed that into a profession. So that's something that we actually in NVPC feel is a very strong way for us to build a human resource pipeline, is by developing volunteers in our organizations. We also are able to experience diversity in work style and cultures when we bring in volunteers from different walks of life into our work. And there's a lot of exhibition of social leadership when they're given that chance to do something that they really believe they can make a difference in. A lot of challenges though. Mindset and cultural adjustment, not just within our organization, but also outside our organization. Trying to convince and share the perspective that volunteerism isn't just about packing food boxes, that there is an entire spectrum of volunteer work that is skilled, that adds a lot of very incredible capacity building value. And that's not something that is easily understood, and we have to spend a lot of time building on that understanding. Within the organization, people expect that when they come to volunteer, maybe in a nonprofit organization, you expect the volunteer is there to just sacrifice themselves and lay their heart and time at the door of the nonprofit, use us as you see fit. And that level of mismatch in expectation and values and mindset needs a bit of work. There is a generational gap. We hire young people that are just leaving school. We hire people who have had several years of experience. But senior management and board members generally are of a different generation. And when you have to create social change together and do adaptive work together with a lot of different complexities, that generational gap and that gap in thinking is very clear. And it manifests a lot of problems sometimes. So we've had to deal with that as well. expectation and reality. A business school graduate that comes into the nonprofit sector that thinks that I'm a consultant, I'm going to turn this around in 2 years, more than often get rather disappointed because things move slowly and the journey is long. You have to learn a lot along the way. I've had to learn a lot along the way. I've been in the nonprofit sector now for, we're talking about whether or not there's more supply than there's demand. If there are a lot of corporate volunteers, Nancy and I were just talking about this over lunch, some corporates will come to us and say, I want 2,000 of my staff to be in skilled volunteer positions within a year. In a country like Singapore, I'm not quite sure where I can put 2,000 skilled volunteers within a year. So that's not an infrequent request. We hear that kind of request quite regularly because different companies have different CSR objectives. Balancing manager, staff, and volunteer dynamics. Staffs and volunteers may have different expectations of each other, and as managers in nonprofit organizations, we have to learn how to tackle that. And then lastly, which is the most important part, which is sustainability. Financial sustainability and professional development. I heard a lot this morning about recovering bankers, recovering consultants. And when we say things like that, the presumption, I think, for most of us is that you're in that sector after you've made your money. That's actually the minority of people that are in the sector. Most of us are in their mid-career. Some of us may have gone from development into this kind of work. And we don't really have a treasure chest of bonuses that we had accumulated over the past 10 years to say, right, now I can do work for charity. And that's a reality that many young people, especially that are coming into the sector, have to grapple with. How do I convince my family, especially if I'm from an Asian family, that I'm not going to make oodles of money while I'm still young and productive. I'm going to make social change. How's that going to pay the bills? How's that going to support retired parents? And that's a real problem that we're struggling with today. When it comes to professional development, the other challenge that we're facing in the nonprofit sector, especially in Singapore, is that there is no visible career path for somebody who's come into the sector. So I start out as an analyst in the nonprofit sector. What do I do next? Analyst, senior analyst, be it the same analyst in another nonprofit organization? But where does this path go? And there's not been enough investment in trying to build this in the nonprofit sector. And I know that there are some people in the audience who are from educational institutions. MVPC regularly conducts recruiting talks in universities. And I can tell you that's usually the first question that we get asked. What's my career path when I join you? And a lot of times it's very hard to answer. So these are real challenges that we're faced when we're trying to grow our team. So what can philanthropy do when it comes to human capital? We are talking about a philanthropy conference, so let's talk about that. Well, firstly, we really cannot overstate the importance of volunteers in our work. They are not just a resource that we can tap on, they are also how we build a pipeline of professionals that come into the sector. And there's not enough support for professionally managing volunteers. There's not enough support for building systems and capacity to manage volunteers well. MVPC some years ago had a grant program that was supporting the hiring of volunteer coordinators in nonprofits. We found that a fair number of our grantees took that money, hired a volunteer coordinator, which was what the money was intended to do, and then in 6 months' time, the volunteer coordinator was asked to do programs, or maybe fundraising. These really, quote-unquote, more critical tasks. So there needs to be a lot more support for that in the nonprofit sector. Cross-sector mindset, and I say that very broadly because I find that there is also a lot of misunderstanding and maybe some myths that need to be busted when it comes to what the philanthropy sector thinks of the nonprofit sector and vice versa. There has to be some level of passion fit plus also a competency fit when people move across sectors. Too many people were like me several years ago that thought that I've got many years of finance experience, I can just as well do microfinance like I could commercial finance. Well, that was very, very different. So that level of understanding needs to be developed. There is a learning curve, and we cannot underestimate that. And also for philanthropy to recognize that social sector professionals are worthy of investment. I didn't come into the sector with a war chest, and I needed to find a job that could pay the bills and raise my 2 kids. And anybody in the nonprofit sector will tell you that's always a very difficult juggle, and it is not easy to find that good combination. Outreach to youth and community. Philanthropy, please open your doors and talk to people that can join you. Foundations don't go out recruiting in Singapore. I don't know why that is. Very few do anyway. I don't know about other countries. It's time to reach out and explore what's available to you among the young. Let's not just look for stay-at-home moms that are looking to get back to the workforce or people that make career switches. Consider how we can develop talent at a young age into the philanthropy sector. And lastly, we need to be creative in the mobilization of human capital. A lot of times in MVPC, we work with volunteers and or part-timers. We create flex-time arrangements. We take contracts that are 3 months to 6 months. We work with volunteers even at project management or committee or advisor level. Be creative in how we engage people. It doesn't always have to be a full-time employment. It doesn't always have to be a full-time volunteer. Let's be creative in how we work with human capital, and maybe we can untap a lot of this potential. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for volunteering and secondment. I think we've heard a lot about volunteering and how important it is to ensure that there's fits at all levels. I think the same goes for the secondment. When we place our managers with our partner institutions, there needs to be a very, very good fit, and we usually take a very long time to recruit. I think as far as HR policies is concerned, the best advice I've ever received is recruit slowly, fire quickly. So we usually take a very long time to look for people that we can then place in the institutions, and often these people come as in volunteering from different cultures, different countries, sometimes even different continents, so we need to make sure that there's a very, very good fit, and we need to make sure that they are absolutely well equipped to perform their job. And one of their responsibilities is to ensure that the expertise that Axiom has built over the past 40 years is really internalized by the institution. So we provide them with a lot of training, a lot of capacity building. I've talked already about these sort of exposure visits. And that's how we feel that we get most out of the seconded people. Because if there's a misfit, it may be even more acute than in volunteering, because these people stay with the institutions for 2 to 3 years at a very, very high level. So if they don't perform, they may even bring down the entire organization, our investment, and of course a lot of damage to the people they work for, i.e. the bottom of the pyramid. I'd like to leave it there.
So in respect to volunteerism, both from our own experience managing volunteers for ourselves, but also matching volunteers with other organizations, we treat it much as we would hiring staff. We write up a job description, we ask for people to submit their resumes, we select the one that seems to fit, we interview, and then we monitor. So on both, we do it for our own volunteers, we do check in and ask for, we give them feedback, we ask them for feedback. And then with the partners that we match volunteers with, we ask both sides to feedback to us. How is it going on a monthly basis? How many hours have you contributed? What's working well, what's not? So I think the biggest drawback we've heard from bad experiences with working with volunteers on staff is that you don't set expectations from the beginning. That's typically the problem. So if you have we've seen job descriptions come to us that we have to send back 6, 7 times because we say this is not clear enough what you're asking for, and it's too broad. It's somebody that can do like the last bullet point and anything else that might be needed. So you try to take that out and just make it as specific what 80% of the time will be spent on. But you have to treat it much as a job. It's hard even for us sometimes to review our volunteers. We rarely review our board members. It's one of our fallbacks, but it's something that we aspire to do and ought to do to keep the performance levels high and to keep everybody happy. And then on the terms of kind of motivating the volunteers, what we do is just involve them as much as possible. From the beginning, we have an orientation. We tell them about our mission. We explain how their work relates to the mission so that they feel a part of it, even if they're just taking notes. So I think that's very important in the nonprofit sector, is that whatever their task may be, that they feel very involved.
And in terms of, so the question is really how do you leverage volunteers?
Yeah, and then how deepen the engagement.
Right. And I think one is related to the other. I think perhaps our model is different from Exion and Lynn. At Asian Charity Services, our program is tightly structured, highly standardized. So if you walk through strategic planning with ACS, it doesn't matter if you're a small environmental NGO of 5 people or a large hospital of 10,000 beds, you'll walk through the exact same process. So what we offer is kind of really this curriculum and this platform, a lot of structure. That's the feedback that we get, both positive and negative. But as a result, we're able to leverage our volunteer time incredibly effectively. So they come in as a diverse, we'll pull together what we call a multifunctional team. And the charity client brings in their team, and they follow a very structured project format. So they know really down to the 30 minutes how everyone's using their time. So there's structure, there's standardization. I would say there's a lot of project management from the ACS perspective, so similar to what you shared, Dana. And as well, there's a lot of support. What we've calculated is that for every standard series of training workshops, which is 9 hours that the NGO would go through, there's about 120 hours invested into those 9 hours, which means that the NGO has, their board has assessed themselves. We analyze those results before you walk into the workshop. Some of our volunteer consultants have gone out to interview certain donors before they start talking about fundraising. So there's a lot of support in the background before everyone comes to the table. There's a Hebrew word I came across, I don't speak Hebrew, called avark, which means to set the table. And in a sense, that's what we find is one of ACS's core competencies, is we prepare or set the table before people come together for this kind of what we call transformation.
I'm really glad that Nancy talked about the time and effort that NGOs spend in order to be ready for volunteers, because just as much as we say funders have to fund volunteer management, NGOs have to be committed to do volunteer management. And Francis used the word addicted so that you become professionals. Well, you can't get addicted to something that you don't like. So the NGOs that work with volunteers need to find that sweet spot where you're appealing to what the volunteer want, what was driving the volunteer in the first place. And sometimes we find, particularly when we work with skilled volunteers, is that the focus is on, I'm an accountant, so I can provide my accounting skills to nonprofits. But they've kind of lost the plot when it came to the fact that I feel very strongly about the environment. So if you get overly focused on skills but you forget what was the cause and the passion that would draw them into the sector in the first place, then you haven't found that sweet spot that they like. And if they don't like it, they can't get addicted to it, then they don't see the benefit or the potential of turning this from a sideline thing that I do in my spare time into a profession. So that's something that we try to spend a lot of time emphasizing to nonprofits, that don't lose the plot. They're not just there as free labor. They're there because something moves them, so you have to find that and relate on that level.
Thank you. So I think I will open the floor now. I will get a round of questions, and then please introduce yourself and your organizations. Yes, we can start from there. And then
thank you. Yes, if I can ask my question from the context of Australian venture philanthropy, then if I could just briefly characterise what I would call a development of the market for mobilising talent. We started probably about 5 to 7 years ago tapping into that first round of back office. Then we would have added on marketing, strategy, support, governance, and I feel our vehicles are pretty well in place now to access those types of skills. I'm interested in the point you raised about moving to the softer skills, and what we're really seeing an urgent need for is support around collaboration. So a lot of our NGOs are needing to collaborate to access government contracts and also to get more impact on the ground. So when we look at to support those challenges with our grantees, we feel that there's real potential to tap into the private sector for those skills that they have around collaboration, particularly even in the investment banking scene with deal making. So bringing together consortiums and working out how to broker and partner and work effectively together. So my question to you is, do you see the need for these sorts of support skills around partnering and collaboration And if so, where do you tap into those resources and what challenges do you have in applying them into the non-profit space?
So I think I will wait until.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sharika from Scope Group. We're an organization, social enterprise based in Malaysia, that leverages on proven business and delivery models to help our clients achieve or scale their impact. So I'm always on the lookout for models that have been proven to work in other places to see how it could be applied in the countries where we work in. And I'm particularly interested in this sort of skills volunteering model, which we started doing end of last year, and we've seen on a small scale that it works. But one thing that I've noticed though in doing this is actually there's, I think, a lot of potential for corporates to also learn from the NGO and to do a reverse model, perhaps, of having NGOs seconded to corporate agencies, if that's possible, I don't know. I've not come across anyone who does that yet, kind of doing it the other way around. And then secondly, so my question is whether you all know of any models that exist like that. And the second question is there a role for the ecosystem really to be sort of strengthened? Because a lot of the reasons why NGOs don't get the sorts of capacity you see in the private sector is because the pay you receive in the NGO sector is a lot lower. And you can be driven so much by the sort of social cause and you have the heart for it, but at the end of the day, you probably have kids to support or other financial things you need to work with. So what could governments or I don't know who else could play a role in making this building the capacity of NGOs to be able to be competitive in the HR we call it race.
Thank you. Please keep the question very short.
Right. Hi, I'm Alfred from ASAP, Research Institute in NUS. My question is, there's a lot of research materials coming up from the Western nations regarding keeping employees or volunteers engaged, right? To buffer against burnouts and disillusionment and stuff like that in our industry. Is there anything that you see that's different in Asia as compared to the research that's coming up from the Western nations, specifically in Asia, to keep the engagement level high? Yeah, that's my question.
West research.
Hi, my name is Peter. I run a skill-based volunteering program, channeling skill from corporates to the needy nonprofits and providing a service to them. Right, I hear panelists talk about the need of intermediaries. So I'm also an intermediary in Singapore. So I'm just wondering, because there's a lot of work to be done to educate the volunteer, to educate the NPO, and to provide effective matching, right? That costs time and costs money. So I'm wondering, my challenge is finding the funders or whoever who are interested to fund this particular work. So I'm interested to hear from you guys, how do you find funding for yourself doing the good work?
Last, please.
Helen from EDB. So we're a government agency that oversees a lot of the industry in Singapore, and we know that there's a lot of large corporations here that have quite extensive volunteerism programs, corporate volunteerism programs, and NDPC does a great job fielding 38,000 companies' requests to do volunteering. But then we're wondering whether people even in the room can share how a corporation goes from general CSR to kind of the next level of engagement on an institutional level for volunteerism. So what I mean is, when you are able to capture somebody and put them into a 2-3 year secondment, for example, they've had to have quite a mind shift. And I'm just wondering whether you've had successes with corporations where through your engagement with them, you've been able to sort of transform their mentality towards corporate volunteerism. And if there's something on the government level that can be structured, which can lead volunteers through that kind of engagement process, that would be great to hear about.
All right. We got plenty of them, so feel free to chip in anything that you were interested, but I have to make sure that someone will be taking care of all of these things. first of all, we talk about the collaboration and partnerships. How can we facilitate these kind of things to the, especially corporate law? Can we get Nancy? Sure. Can you address in particular figures? And then we talked about the new way of secondment, especially I think the other way around. NGO second someone to the corporate world. How is the thinking behind all these things? And then East and West. I think the experience comparison. Maybe Hans can take care of the secondment questions. We can address that. East and West, maybe Dana, do you mind? How do you compare the Western way and the Eastern way? Maybe we haven't read that research, but I think in general we compare that. So get together maybe the ecosystem. We didn't get enough pay, and then on the funding for the NGOs, I think in general, maybe Pat, you can address that. Maybe.
I'll just pick it the pieces a little bit of everything.
Yes, good. And then at the end, I think the CSR, the institution level government, I think anyone please chip in to talk a little bit about that. I think that's a very important perspective as well. So who can go first? Maybe Nancy?
Sure. So the question on partnership or collaboration was how to catalyze that?
Yeah, how do you access that type of resource in the corporate sector?
Okay.
To bring it into the non-profit sector?
Right. We've just started moving in that direction. So even within our short history of 6 years and 120 clients, what we've realized is probably what's already patently obvious to everybody else is there's incredible silos in the social sector. And the normal modus operandi for high impact, wonderful charities is to put your head down and just serve as much as you can. You don't have really that bandwidth to keep your head up and say, gosh, my services are now overlapping with 2 or 3 other NGOs in the community. Or is there some way that we can work together and really provide a value chain of services rather than not even be aware at all? And so that's something we're learning as well. But what we've identified actually, so I'll have a part one, or a precursor to your question, is to really understand the NGOs. And we actually just got a grant from Macquarie to do this. So we love Australia and Macquarie. But which is that what we found is NGOs actually have to better know themselves. In a sense, before you can be a good partner, whether in an NGO capacity or even in a marriage capacity, you have to have a good understanding of yourself. What are your strengths, your weaknesses? Clarify your own mission. And I tell you, most NGOs, 80% of them still need to clarify their own mission. What do they stand for? What are their strengths and weaknesses? What is their competitive advantage? Once they've done that, then they're in a position then to speak. Then that actually relieves some of the fear, because their identity, their positioning in the market is more clear. Then they can go out and interact with others in the same sector and identify those overlaps, identify those touch points.
May I ask if it's the same skill set that's coaching those NGOs to get to that mentality and that ability to think collaboratively? Are you tapping into the same resources?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. And it's really coaching the individual NGOs and their leaders and giving them a very strong picture of who they are, what their potential is, and therefore they're able to go out and connect more strategically, if you will. I would say actually in board governance and across all our signature workshop programs, we have an element called comparable. We took away competitive, it was too sensitive. Comparable organization analysis, where our volunteer consultants would go out and study other organizations. Yeah. In board governance, they study what's the board composition of other similar, if you're juvenile diabetes organizations, other juvenile diabetes associations. In strategic planning, they go out and look at mission, vision, funding, programming, and where does that overlap? And in fundraising strategies, sources of funding. But in a sense, once organizations have studied, have a better sense of who they are strategically, their identity, their vision, their mission, their programming, as well as an understanding where the other organizations are placed, then they're prepared to go out and begin that conversation. So sorry, that was the precursor to your question. So it is the same set of skills and the same volunteer pool.
So I'm answering the comparison between East and West. I don't know if it's so different. Again, I'm based in Vietnam, and I have experience in Vietnam, Latin America, and the U.S. So I can only really share with you what I see there. But I think it's more a level of the stage that Vietnam is at versus a difference between Vietnam and the U.S. Because the type of volunteering I see in Vietnam is similar to some small pockets in other countries, but that there's more variety of the types of volunteering. We get asked so much for volunteer dance service. And I think that's a product of the Vietnamese government investing a lot in youth volunteer campaigns that are like a volunteer dance service. And that's all over the media and things like that. So that's what the public understands right now. And so I think it's more just getting more people to have those experiences and discovering them and sharing them. So having to inspire them. But I don't think it's necessarily a cultural reason, but more just experience.
Okay, I know what you're going to talk about, so I'll try to address Helen's question. How can we take corporations from CSR to the next level, to really engender a mind shift, a corporate-wide mind shift? And coming from microfinance, we have seen a lot of the very, very large international banks, the largest banks in the world, including Citibank, ING, MasterCard, Visa, etc., getting very interested in microfinance. And they have not only sent volunteers, for example, we have received from Credit Suisse a number of volunteers, but they have also started to develop their own in-house programs. And there has actually been then a volunteering from one department to their own internal department, thereby engender real corporate-wide change. Of course, I have to admit that microfinance, financial industry, it's very easy because it's so closely related, right? I mean, it would be difficult to find a similar fit, for example, in the oil and gas industry, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that I think each corporation needs to find its niche where it wants to spend the resources and focus the resources on that specific niche. And that niche doesn't necessarily need to be linked to its core business. It could also be, for example, be linked to one of its core competences or one of its core values, and then make sure that there's a strong focus and a lot of activities around these areas and elements. So there's an ongoing drive and mission so that the whole corporation institution is sort of like engaged on a permanent basis.
I find that intermediation is usually necessary in that process.
The intermediation, I really can only speak for microfinance. I mean, microfinance is not necessary because those two worlds are so close and they get closer and closer, right? But I can very well imagine that in other sectors it is very much necessary.
Before Pat addressing the last questions, I would like the other panelists to prepare something. I'm not going to close the section. I want each of you to end with one line about today's topic, mobilizing human capital. So please get prepared for that.
Okay, I'm going to speak a little bit longer so everybody else has some time to think about their work. There are a few things that I'd like to point out at several of these questions, but just to address Helen's question, I do think that actually some intermediation is necessary, not always from a matching perspective, but more to be able to break down certain previously established mindsets about the role CSR should play in the corporate sector. And I think that that's actually a fundamental roadblock that we're facing in MVPC when we work with corporates. We tried to form a network of corporates, we call them the Corporate Giving Council, and the hope at the time was that they would drive their own community towards better citizenry. And it's slow going. We're making progress, but it's slow. And one of the reasons why it's slow is because CSR is not business. And that's really something that's very fundamental that we need to try and, if not overcome, then certainly at least be able to reconcile, so that there is a constructive view of what citizenry means to a corporate. So in that sense, I think the intermediation is very important. Because the intermediation breaks down these barriers to the different mindsets. On the point of NGO secondment to corporates, actually MVPC is piloting something. We're not seconding, we're attaching. certain staff members to the corporate sector. But actually we feel that we need to start even with baby steps. NGOs aren't seconding to other NGOs. And and that's something that we may need to address first before we try to put them into the corporate sector. So you're right that there needs to be a lot more of these types of professional exchanges, but we thought that maybe the best place to start would be within the sector first before crossing sectors. And the third point was about who funds intermediaries. Difficult question to answer, and I guess that's what why we're here in this conference, right? But one of the things that we may want to consider also is whether or not the nonprofits are themselves putting some skin in the game. I'm sure many of you have seen that YouTube from Dan Pelota when he was talking in the TED Talks about how we need to invest in an organization's capacity. This argument has been raised many years before. We call it the nonprofit starvation cycle. Nonprofits aren't putting money into themselves to develop their own capacity. They're directing all monies to programs. And in a way, if the nonprofits or social enterprises aren't seeing this as something that's worth investing in, how do we convince funders to do the same? So I think we also need to start to mobilize the nonprofit sector ourselves. So let's put some skin in the game here. If you were given no limit about how you want to allocate your budget, how much money would you really put towards investing in your staff versus in your program? And I would say let's ask that question among ourselves and see where that takes us. Is that enough time for our one-liners?
So now you can prepare. We need your wisdom. Start with one last line to summarize or synthesize.
Well, I would just share, I guess my mission in coming to this conference was to see if the philanthropy network would consider more often investing in the people, either themselves giving not just money, but also investing their time in the organizations they support, or supporting the investment in the people.
One line.
I mean, it's called like preaching to the choir because you're here at Venture Philanthropy, right? And the whole approach to venture philanthropy is applying kind of business principles, business approaches. So I would say mobilizing human capital is transformational. Money actually is not transformational. Mobilizing human capital is transformational.
Very good. You need some more time?
You were.
Again, talking about recruitment, go for quality rather than quantity. There's a lot. You will have a lot more impact by seconding, sending one person with the right skill set and the right attitude and qualifications than by sending 10.
2,000. We're talking.
Yeah. 10. Right? Yeah.